Good morning, family. It's hard to believe that today is the fourth day of this Feast of Tabernacles 2011. Midst of the feast, it seems to go so quickly. Every year I'm amazed at just how fast the time we have to celebrate together goes by. But every year as we celebrate this feast, this particular appointed time that God has appointed from before the foundation of the world, one thing that we are to experience, I think perhaps more than any of the other feasts of God, is joy. The Jews actually refer to this festival at times as the festival of our joy. And one of the things that is interesting, if you were to attend a Jewish synagogue, is that every year on each particular high holy day, there's a particular scriptural reading that they do to remind them or some way reflect on the particular time or the particular holy day that they're observing. For example, in the Feast of Pentecost, they read the book of Ruth. And there are a lot of lessons really that you can gain from reading Ruth during the Feast of Pentecost. But I think it's interesting that during the Feast of Tabernacles, what they call Sukkot, which means booths, temporary dwellings, they read the book of Kohelet. Kohelet is the Hebrew word for preacher, and we know it as the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, many who read Ecclesiastes are left with the impression that the words of Solomon are, how should you say, depressing rather than uplifting, and certainly do not fit the theme of joy. Yet a closer reading of the book actually reveals just the opposite. In fact, the theme of the book is joy. But the surprise is where it's found. And so, to help us reflect, brethren, on the joy that we should be experiencing during this particular appointed time with God and our family, I thought I would look at some of the lessons that we can learn from the book of Ecclesiastes. Tabernacles reminds us of the goal to where we are heading, dwelling in the very presence of God. As Vance spoke about, we look forward to that transitionary period when we're going from that's temporary to a permanent time. And certainly the millennium looks forward to that time. But brethren, those of us whom God has called now, are we not? Are we not now in that transitionary period? For during the millennium, we will be spirit beings. We will have experienced that first resurrection, that better resurrection. And this temporary will have put on immortality. But during this time, 7 days, the Almighty asks us to put away the comforts of our normal dwellings, together in a temporary dwelling. And I think this was more meaningful in one way to the ancient Israelites after they actually started keeping it. There was a long period they didn't actually do the things in keeping the Feast of Tabernacles until the time of Nehemiah. There was a long period there where they probably observed the feast, but they didn't dwell in the booths, and they were missing an important point. And the booths they built were very temporary indeed. In fact, they were required to just have 3 sides It had to have a roof, but through the roof, you had to be able to see through the roof. You had to be able to see the stars, because that reminded them of the glory of the Almighty that created them. And it was very temporary, and they would build their booths, and usually around all of Jerusalem, because it was a pilgrim feast, and so all around Jerusalem you would see these little temporary, just looked like little huts, and they were humble, to say the least. But that is where they were to find their joy. Now, brethren, today we stay in temporary dwellings. Perhaps they're not so humble. Some of us are living, some condos are pretty nice. Actually, mine is pretty nice. But nonetheless, that after 7 days, or 8 days when we're here, there's something about going home, about sleeping in your own bed, having the comforts of your own home that you sort of miss. So while we not perhaps have the humility that our ancient brethren have, still we can appreciate that staying in the condo or the motel or wherever, that's nice for a while, but it's not something we want to do permanently. So for 7 days, we're asked to live in these temporary dwellings and to learn the real nature of joy. And if it weren't for these reminders, brethren, this reminder that even in our temporary dwelling, to eat, drink, and enjoy the company of family and friends, that's where our real joy is. Because apart from these reminders, we might be persuaded that material possessions or our position in life or our power or whatever is where our real joy lies and is more important than our relationships with God and family and friends. And that is why the reading of Ecclesiastes is so appropriate at Tabernacles. You see, the wisest man who ever lived up to the time of Jesus Christ came to the realization that he had the power, the wealth, and the ability to seek out every avenue of pleasure on this earth. And it appears that he went searching. In the end, what he found was that true joy could not be found in the pleasures of food or wine or in the luxurious surroundings available only to the wealthy. All of the wonderful aspects of life that his position and wealth could afford, he found to be but a vapor. What he discovered was this joy is found in one's acceptance of God's blessings and the simple pleasures of family and friends. But these could not be stored up for the future, but could only be enjoyed for a fleeting moment. You see, brethren, that's the way God's blessings are, like a beautiful sunset or a breathtaking mountain view early in the morning. Images of beauty that cannot be perfectly captured even with the highest pixel digital camera. The moment of grandeur must be embraced with a blessing to God and then savored only in memory. But the hug of a child, a kiss, a loving pat, and even the conversation about life and experience, shared within the context, brethren, of family and community, are ever as grand as a sunset or a mountain scene. Yet these moments are likewise fleeting and must be enjoyed as they come, embracing the moment and blessing God for it. It is this fleeting nature of things that best describes how Solomon was thinking as he wrote Ecclesiastes. And to communicate this idea, he used the Hebrew word havel. Havel always describes a vapor or a breath elsewhere in Scripture. For example, you don't need to turn there. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples where havel is used as a vapor. Isaiah 57:13. When you cry out, let your collection of idols deliver you, but the wind will carry all of them up, and the breath will take them away. The word breath there is havel. But he who takes refuge in me shall inherit the land and shall possess my holy mountain. Another example is Proverbs 21:6. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor, the pursuit of death. Now, unfortunately, in translating Ecclesiastes, the English translation has chosen the word vanity or worthless or even meaningless to translate havel. But they're missing the point, brethren, because Solomon is not telling us that things are worthless or meaningless. He is simply saying that they are transitory, fleeting, temporary, and that to expect deep and lasting joy from things that are temporary is foolish and will always end in disappointment. The reason Solomon's words are so important for us to read and understand is because those things that are temporary or fleeting often appear as though they are not. Or at least we pretend that they are not. And we spend most of our time trying to collect these fleeting things so that we think we can be happy. But when we read Ecclesiastes, brethren, we are called to recognize and appreciate that those things that bring greatest joy and are more permanent are not those things that are fleeting. You know, so central is the word havel in Ecclesiastes that Solomon uses it for bookends of the entire book. Note how the text opens in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. It says, if you read it vapor, he says, "Vapor of vapor, says the preacher, thinnest of vapors, all is a vapor." And then look at how it closes in chapter 12, verse 8. "Vapor of vapor, says the preacher, all is a vapor." Sandwiched between these obvious bookends are the thoughts of Solomon. Thoughts, brethren, that speak to every generation. And God knows, brethren, our generation is in particular need of this message. Our lives run at a pace never before experienced in the scope of human history, with information bombarding us in an almost unimaginable barrage of media. And our schedules have become so full that we savor even a moment of time in which we can enjoy a rare moment of silent reflection. But it is our relationship within family and community that we suffer the most within such a fast-paced society. Oh, we've tried to make up for it with Facebook and I'm going to say rear-end book. I don't. You know, it's gotten ridiculous. All the different. We try to make up for the face-to-face, the human need for community, for interaction. And I think we fall short. Because rather than the relationships within family and community, to be able to simply fail to take the time to simply sit, eat, and enjoy the greatest gift of all, friendship. God knows that we need tabernacles, 7 days to rejoice before Him. But notice well that the rejoicing is coupled with dwelling in the sukkah, the humble dwelling. Our joy is not first and foremost in the beauty of the location, even though we are in a beautiful location, or even in the wonderful messages we hear. These are wonderful and very important, but the rejoicing of tabernacles is done in the sukkah, in the dwelling place, because it is there that we gather with our family and friends, our brothers and sisters. In a kind of forced blessing, we come back to the ground zero of our joy, the people God has put into our lives. You know, as I reflect back on the many tabernacles I've celebrated, you know what sticks out to me more than anything are some of the times where we've gone with friends, gone to a restaurant, where we've done things together. Meeting new people, meeting new brothers, meeting new old friends, if you get my drift. Those are the things we remember. But brethren, even these, according to Solomon, are in one sense fleeting, because the years we have together are relatively few. And the cycle of life moves on whether we recognize it or not. Our children will grow into adults and we'll be blessed to form their own homes with their own children. Indeed, the special moments of childhood are fleeting. Every time we attend a funeral, we are reminded that the cycle of life turns for each of us. Our days are numbered, and our time in life is brief. This, too, is one of Solomon's themes. But rather than seeing it as morbid, he turns this fact into an exhortation to seize the moment, carpe diem, if you will. These moments of joy that give real meaning to our lives cannot be bottled up for the future, nor can they be replayed over and over again like some kind of spiritual TiVo. Always we must return to the toil and labor of life, which, though good, is often burdensome. Thus we must seize the moment, offering a blessing to God, and return to our work refreshed by God's abundant kindness. This is the message of Ecclesiastes, and this is why it is so relevant for tabernacles. Stop, sit, enjoy the simple pleasures of life, and discover the meaning God intends for our life. Then offer to God the thanksgiving. But Solomon envisions, if you read Ecclesiastes, he envisions several things that can be traps to the full realization of these truths, brethren. Things that appear to be the source of lasting joy but are not. We can trace his thoughts by looking for what he labels as vapor, or a vapor of vapors, which is a Hebrew way of saying the thinnest of vapors. The first he mentions is the money trap. You know, Solomon was the wealthiest man of his time. Certainly whatever he wanted, he could buy. He was sort of like the Bill Gates of the ancient Mideast, or maybe even more, I don't know, some Arab sheik perhaps. He no doubt experienced the sheer love of gold and monetary ability. And at one point, stockpiling it for him must have been a driving force. Some think that through their love of money and the power it brings, they will find meaning and joy in life. And in fact, Solomon actually says, tongue-in-cheek no doubt, in Ecclesiastes 10:19, that money is the answer to everything. Look, if you will, at Ecclesiastes 4:8. It says, "There was a certain man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother. Yet there was no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, 'And for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure?' This too is a vapor and a grievous task." And chapter 5, verse 10. "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is a vapor." It's usually, brethren, sad to say that those who are at the lower rung of economic ladder are the ones who usually fall into this trap. They think if they had just enough money, all their problems would disappear, and happiness would be theirs. So their happiness is set upon the elusive dream of being rich, or at least rich enough for the necessities and a few extras. But take a word of wisdom from the richest man of the ancient Near East. Money is neither the path to meaning in our lives nor to joy. While it is important and necessary, and one who has money has many advantages, it too is a vapor. As we learned too recently, one's entire life savings can vanish in a day, and Wall Street in an hour. In fact, the money trap is also set for those who think the future can be secured by it. Look at chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is a vapor and a severe affliction. In the uncertainty of world events, and this was as much true in ancient times as it is in ours, brethren, money may offer little or no advantage. The Apostle Paul realized this when he wrote in 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." And I'm reminded of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus Christ and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to have eternal life?" And Jesus gave him the commandments, and he said, "All these I have kept from my youth. What more do I lack?" Christ knew what he lacked. He lacked putting God first, to truly honor God and not have an idol, because his idol was money, and Christ could see right through him, and he knew. And when he asked him to give all that he had away to the poor, he went away sorrowful. And it said Jesus Christ was saddened. The point is clear, brethren. While money is important and necessary, it cannot bring genuine meaning and joy to life. And anyone who thinks it can is holding on to a vapor. Then Solomon speaks to the power trap. The trap of trying to secure family, prestige, or name, or advantage to overcome the contingencies of life. This trap presents itself in a number of ways. The first is by trying to have such a family name that everyone connected will automatically receive meaning and joy from it. Look at chapter 6, verses 3 through 6. It says, "If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place?" Throughout all the history of mankind, the attempt to procure a family dynasty, whether in royal lineage or in societal power, has been evident. I think we see it more clearly. It rings clear to us when we look at Joseph Kennedy and all the things that man did, legal and illegal, to secure the Kennedy name throughout generations. And yet he's dead and gone and did not even live. He saw his eldest son die in the war. Had he lived to see the assassination of John F., the assassination of Robert, some of the tragedies that befell Ted Kennedy, what did all his striving accomplish, brethren? Not much. You see, he was holding on to a vapor. In chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, verse 18 through 19, it says, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is a vapor." Solomon labored and was wise and amassed a great fortune and a great empire. But what did his son Rehoboam do? split it in two. You see, Solomon failed to learn his own lesson in the end, didn't he? Sad. Then, brethren, there's the occupation trap. It is not uncommon to find people who think that their meaning in life will be found in their occupation. Look at chapter 2, verses 22 through 23 of Ecclesiastes. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is a vapor. I think we all know, brethren, people who are workaholics. They seek to find their purpose in life by always working. In fact, if you talk to them, it's rare that their conversation is not somehow in regard to their job or their employment or their profession. Unfortunately, if they ever become unable to perform their occupation or their task, then these people actually lose their identity. That is why Ecclesiastes refers to work itself as a vapor. We must face the reality that our occupation does not define who we are. Rather, we must see our occupation as merely a means to an end. Working simply provides the necessary means to sustain ourselves so that we can accomplish the ultimate task, and that is honoring and sanctifying the name of God upon the earth. If our occupation is a means to that end and not an end in itself, then not only will we do better in our work, but in doing our work we will have higher goal in mind. God will be honored. And when God is honored, we are also blessed. Now, of course, doing the best job that we can is good. And that's what each of us should strive for. Don't get me wrong. Yet taken to an extreme, doing a good job can grow into pride and arrogance. Look at chapter 4 and verse 4. It says, I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of a rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is a vapor and a striving after wind. Competition and striving for quality are good things. It is often in the context of healthy competition that greater work is done. But if we try to find our meaning, brethren, in our job and in life by being the best there is at something, then, brethren, Solomon says we are holding on to a vapor. Another thing that Solomon speaks to is the pleasure trap. Perhaps there is nothing more that characterizes modern America than the desire for personal pleasure. With the affluence of our society have come many voices promising every imaginable comfort. Some try to find this in exhilarating experiences, whether in testing one's own strength and fortitude or attempting a daredevil feat. Solomon had been there. Chapter 2, verse 1. He said, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. Drop down to verse 3. I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. He also indulged in, brethren, in things that would bring a man pleasure, and found them all to be a vapor, a striving after wind. Chapter 2, verse 4 says, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself, which to irrigate a forest containing trees. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasure of men, many concubines. You see, sometimes in the pursuit of pleasures, a person acts the part of a fool who, rather than face reality, jokes his way through life instead of stopping to contemplate life as it is. People use entertainment as a mask to cover the pain of reality. Granted, entertainment, especially comedy, can be a great relief. But it can also cloud the truth that needs to be faced. Solomon speaks to this in chapter 7, verse 6. For as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this too is futility. Pretending everything is okay when it is not is in fact the laughter of a fool. Ecclesiastes equates it with the crackling of thorn bushes in a fire. A lot of noise, but not much heat. Surely a superficial view of life in general cannot be the foundation for true meaning and joy. Brethren, there are other categories there that I don't have time to go into. But I suggest that you read Ecclesiastes during this time and look for the things that Solomon calls vanity. But let me go then by stating this. What is Solomon's answer then? I've told you all the things that he said, or some of the things that he said were not true means of joy, but traps. He answers that question, where true joy can be found, and it's in chapter 2, verse 24. And it's rather shocking, but it is profound. He says, there is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, it is from the hand of God. Go to chapter 5, verse 8. Here is what I have seen to be good and fitting: to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Chapter 8, verse 15. So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry. And this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life which God has given him under the sun. Chapter 9, verse 7. Go then, eat your bread in happiness, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. And finally, in chapter 9, verse 9, Solomon says, enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life which he has given you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Brethren, the common denominator, if you'll notice in each of these texts, is the simple pleasure of eating and drinking. But it is clear that Solomon means by this is the time spent with family and friends around a common table. You know, in the ancient East, Mideast, and still today, table fellowship was an important thing. The family table was symbolic of the altar. That's why the Jews later in the first century had such a hard time accepting Gentiles to sit at their table, because it was like they were approaching the altar, and they did not want a pagan to approach the altar of their God. So when you had table fellowship one with another, it was as if God himself were there sharing that table with you. And to be invited into one's home to sit at his table was indeed a great honor. Sitting with family and friends to eat after a day's labor, laughing and enjoying the friendship around the table, finding a moment of cheer together, enjoying the companionship of one's spouse. These are the small yet profound moments in which we recognize an even greater truth. We are created for relationship, and it is in relationship with others and God that we find true meaning and joy. Now it becomes clear why Ecclesiastes is read at Tabernacles. Surrounded by friends and family in the sukkah, in our humble dwellings, the most important aspects of life on earth are faced squarely as we rejoice before the Lord in the simple act of eating, drinking, and enjoying the friendship of brother and sister and our family. For the brief time we have upon this earth is punctuated throughout with genuine symphonies of happiness. But the melody comes in the hug of a child, the kiss of a spouse, and the conversation at the table. And the musicians are those who enter our lives and bring the possibility of true communion. After all, in this festival we are rehearsing for a time when we will sit in the sukkah with Jesus himself. And there around the table, if we have learned to recognize what true happiness is, we will engage in the unending joy of communion with him. That is why he talks about coming to the feast in the kingdom, coming to sit at the table with Abraham, the marriage feast of the Lord. Let us look at the epilogue of Ecclesiastes, because even these things, brethren, that I've just described, we must realize are fleeting. They can't be stored up. We must experience them as they come and thank God for them. And then they are only in our memory. So Solomon tells us, brethren, how we could take on a lifestyle that honestly considers relationship to be more valuable than anything else. How does this kind of thinking become the pattern for our decisions and actions? Ecclesiastes, in the epilogue, he says, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. Brethren, a vapor in and of itself is not bad. In fact, it can be even good and very wonderful. But it is short and impossible to store up. This is the meaning of Ecclesiastes. So, brethren, I call on all of us to learn the lesson at Tabernacles as you read Ecclesiastes and carry it with us throughout the year. Do not overlook the importance of a meal together, or the time when your children or grandchildren want to sit on your lap. Do not rush through the conversations with your spouse or think that a walk together is just for your physical health. Never take the scene of beauty for granted or a wonder of God's creation as common. Each of these moments in life are given to grant us meaning and joy. Seize them. Bless God for them. And return to our labors after this feast with renewed thanksgiving for joy itself. Chag Sameach. May you have a joyous feast.